Alice and I this summer were walking, remember we were near Mishkanochanim, and some woman walked by us and I heard them say, it was 3 people, they were like in their 60s, and I heard somebody whisper to the other, you know, there's that important feminist or something like that. And then it was so amazing. These people walked by, it was 2 women and a man, and they walked by, and then about 30 seconds later, the woman came back, and she said, you know, it's such a, you know, are you Alice Shalvi? It's such an honor to meet you. She said, I watched your lecture about King Lear, because, and I said, which it was my birthday lecture, and Paula Wyman-Kelman, who had taped it, had put it on YouTube. So I was like, oh my God, I can't believe people are watching this on YouTube. But this woman who I have no idea what her name was, had done that. Anyway, because I was coming back here again this summer, Alice and I talked about teaching another Shakespeare play. And I asked her, I learned so much. So I wanted to have the pleasure again, and I thought I would share the pleasure with others, actually, is really what it was. And I asked Alice what play she wanted to teach, and she wanted to teach A Midsummer's Night's Dream. So, so we're all so lucky. The person I really need to thank most is you. But we're all lucky to be learning from you this morning. So thank you. And thank you to my sister Abby, where, I don't know if she walked out of the room, but whose house we're in, and to her son Sam, who actually read the play with Abby, and who stayed home from school today to learn about the play like all of us.
Thank you. The way we got to Midsummer Night's Dream was because I felt that after the real exhaustion that I incurred as a result of working on King Lear, which particularly now that I've reached my age, which is even a decade older, and we know about King Lear that he was 84 and up. He was over 80. Well, I've got a bit further than that. I'm now over 90. But when I taught it, I, for the first time, really saw the play from a completely different perspective, that of King Lear. And I thought, no, this time I want to do a comedy. I can't go through that emotional, exhausting experience. And so I picked Midsummer Night's Dream because I think it's a very charming play. Charming, and I mean it. There are a lot of charms, right? People are enchanted, right? Magic charms, and it has a lightness about it. And I'll come to that as well. But of course, like all Shakespeare's plays, when you get down to it, you find a serious theme. A serious theme, albeit treated lightly, a comedy. But it's that serious theme that I want to get to eventually today. I think this is a play most of you know. I just heard that one member of the audience at least acted in it some years ago. I assume that even if you haven't actually seen it, you have some idea of the plot. But I want to begin actually by talking about the title, and wondering, when Shakespeare's audience first came to see this, what was evoked for them by the title? Because I'm not sure that we have exactly the same associations. Some, yes, some will overlap, but they, because of their far greater awareness of folklore. I mean, they lived folklore. It wasn't folk, it wasn't something foreign to them. There were particular associations with these 3 words: midsummer, night, and dream. Now, midsummer is, first of all, it's the longest day and the shortest night, which you might not think when you read the play, because the night goes on forever and ever, as it were, right? There's very little day in it, actually. But midsummer is also, first of all, it was the day on which young women would go out into the fields to engage in jollity, dance, music, and so on, together with the young men, a little bit like Tuba auf. Exactly. It was their Tuba auf, right? And on the other hand, it was also associated with madness, midsummer madness, right? And those of you who know Miss Julie, for example, Strindberg's Miss Julie, may remember that that takes place on Midsummer Night, right? Okay. So you've got the association with love, but you've also got the association with madness, an interesting combination. I'll get back to that later. And as for dream, of course, not reality. Dream is not reality. That's one's association with it. But what more? Night is fear, it's insecurity, it's being very dependent on the moon, because it was only from the moon that you got light, right? Unless you were going around with a lantern. And the four central characters in this play are not carrying lanterns. I'm talking here about the four whose names are up here, right? So that sense of being, we use the term now metaphorically, in the dark, right, means that you don't quite know where you are. It's a sense of dislocation. Right? It's also, of course, the time when you sleep normally. And when you sleep, and here we come to the final word, dream. You dream. And dream is not reality, but it becomes a kind of reality. And sometimes when you dream, when you wake up from a dream, you're not really quite sure whether it was a dream. Because one of the things we've learned from Freud, I think, and I think that Shakespeare knew this intuitively, as he knew so many things intuitively, right? Is that he calls it the fierce vexation of a dream. The way in which your subconscious comes up, right? Things that we suppress when we're awake, and suddenly, right, our desires, our fears, our longings, and particularly erotic feelings and responses and desires appear in our dreams. Right? And I think it's interesting to note how really he captures that sense of, the unreal being in a way quite real. So I'm thinking about the associations that these words would have aroused in the audience. What were they expecting to see? Right? Which of those associations would they think would be appropriate? They don't know. Are they going to be taken by surprise, as many of us are when we go to a theatre in order to see a play that we've never read, that we've never seen, that we don't know anything about, right? Or will they have, it must be going to be about these things and the things that I've just mentioned, right? So much for the title and its associations. Now let me come to the action of the play. The action of the play has actually 5 separate strands. It's like a web. It's like something you're going to weave together, but you begin, I don't know, have any of you ever done weaving? You know what weaving is, right? You begin with these 5 strands of colors, and now you're going to mix them into a pattern of some sort, one with the other, and they become, to a certain extent, indistinguishable, right? They become one unity, although if you look very hard, you can say, oh yes, that's the red thread, and that's the yellow thread, and that's the blue thread, right? Okay, well, let's begin with these 5 strands, right? The first one, the opening of the play, right, which is set in Athens, at the court, actually, not just the city, the court of Theseus in Athens, right? And Athens, as we see from the action of that opening scene, is a place of law and order. It's at the moment also the place where Theseus and Hippolyta are going to be married in 4 days' time. We're told that explicitly, right? Because Hippolyta's very, Theseus is very impatient. I wish the time were over. And she said, no, it's okay. It's only 4 days. So we have a time scheme as well as a place scheme already, right? So we begin in Athens, and we know that the 4th night is going to be the new moon. There's the moon already right in Act 1, Scene 1, right? And if the new moon's going to be in 4 days' time, then the night is going to be pretty dark, right? Because the old moon will have waned almost completely. So there you've got the time scheme, you've got the place already, and you've got a wedding which is going to take place in the very near future. The relationship between Theseus and Hippolyta is also posited right at the beginning. Right? A strange relationship, a paradox. Right? Theseus says to Hippolyta, Hippolyta, I wooed thee with my sword, and won thy love, doing thee injury. How strange. To woo someone, they had been enemies, right? They'd been at war with each other. But to woo with a sword and won thy love through beginning with enmity. In other words, there's been a total reversal. But they're two things you would not normally put together. Right? They're not two things that you would normally associate. Love and sword. So there's already here a certain paradox. So that relationship between Theseus and Hippolyta presents really very early on, it's about line 5 of the play, already presents this strange combination of opposites, really. Right? So the court, it's going to be a wedding soon, but the court is also a place of law and authority. Into these preparations for weddings comes a father dragging in his daughter and the two men involved, right? Demetrius and Lysander. Right? Now, before the play opens, we're told, Demetrius loved Helena, Helena loved Demetrius, but Lysander loves Hermia, who is the daughter of the man who's complaining, right? And Hermia loves Lysander. But the father wants Hermia, Geas is the father of Hermia, to marry Demetrius, right? So all of a sudden, Sally, arrow needed, you've got Demetrius to Hermia. How do you want it? Right? Use another, whatever you like, as long as there's an arrow. That's it. Okay? And the person who's out is Helena. You can put a big...
Should I cross her out?
No, at the moment she's all right. Now, yes, okay, stage 2. You have to put a 2 next to it because that's already stage 2. Right? So that's the situation when the play opens, which has already changed from what it was before. And the order, Theseus, of course, the man of authority, right, sides with the father. Because as a ruler has authority over his subjects, so a father has rule over his children, his daughter. And Hermia has to choose. Either, and this is a crucial point, she has to choose between marrying the man of her father's choice or the alternative, which her father stipulates, death. Right? Very cruel choice. Theseus softens that down a little bit. He says, no, it doesn't necessarily death, but it is the life in a convent, in actual fact. I don't know whether you want to follow this in the text, but if you do, then it's Act 1, Scene 1, line 79, which is, I want to read the reference to you, because it's important, yes. He says, either to die the death, this is Theseus now, you know, when Hermia asks, well, what's my alternative, right? Either to die the death or to abjure forever the society of man. Therefore, fair Hermia, question your desires, know of your youth, examine well your blood, whether if you yield not to your father's choice, you can endure the livery of a nun, for I to be in shady cloister mewed, to live a barren sister all your life, chanting faint hymns to the cold, fruitless moon, right? The moon here compared to the Virgin. Thrice blessed they that master sow their blood to undergo such maiden pilgrimage. But earthlier happy is the rose distilled than that which, withering on the virgin thorn, grows, lives, and dies in single blessedness. Right? That comparison or contrast, right, between the barrenness of the cloister, right, and the fruitfulness of marriage. And you have here, again, the moon. The moon here is associated with barrenness, virginity, and a cloistered life, right, as far as human beings are concerned, right? So that's the choice with which Hermia, that's the initial dilemma which faces the lovers, these two particular lovers, right? And in order to escape this cruel fate, right, they, Hermia and Lysander, decide simply to run away, to escape to the forest the following night. Not that same night, but the following night, right? So again, we're switching times, we're also switching place. They tell Helena, who is Hermia's very best friend, right? They tell Helena about this, and Helena decides to tell Demetrius. Why? What's her motive? What has she got to gain from it? Nothing except to be in his company, because she plans to follow him and just to be near him for the night, right? For the time that he's going to be looking in the forest for Lysander and Hermia. There's a degree of masochism here which is extraordinary. And it's an interesting key to Helena's character altogether. Right? So we'll now have the court, we have the lovers, and now we have another strand, which is the strand of the artisans, the hempen homespuns, Puck calls them, right? The man in the street, I suppose we might refer to. And these artisans, this group of artisans, each one with his own profession, which we are told specifically, are preparing a play which they hope will be chosen to be performed at the wedding 4 days hence. And they plan to rehearse that play the next night in the forest, where we already know that the lovers, the two lovers, Lysander and Hermia, and Helena hopes Demetrius, right, plan also to be. Okay. Now, here's another strand. What is this play that they're going to put on? Right? Extraordinary play to choose for a wedding night. It's the story of Pyramus and Thisbe. The lamentable comedy, they call it, of Pyramus and Thisbe. Right? Certainly, again, incongruity. Why choose that subject? Star-crossed lovers, which of course, reflects the star-crossed lovers that we've already met. Right? Okay. But it's not exactly a choice that normal, or educated, sophisticated people would make to present at a wedding. Now when we switch to the forest, we get another strand of action. The final strand, which is that of the fairies. The fairies who rule the forest. Oberon is comparable to Theseus. By the way, very often in productions now, the same actor plays the two parts because they're never on stage at the same time. Right? So you can, after all, Shakespeare had a very limited number of actors at his disposal. Right? And with these fairies, in this fairy world, the two leading characters in that world, Oberon, the king of the fairies, and Titania, are quarreling. What is the quarrel over? An Indian boy, a changeling. Right? So like Demetrius and Lysander fighting over Hermia, here we have Titania and Oberon reflecting that same kind of rivalry over the Indian boy. Right? And they meet at night. That's when fairies are around, as it were. That nighttime is fairy time. Right? Okay. And why are they here? Why are Oberon and Titania, who apparently normally live in India, we gather at some point in the play, right? Why are they here? Well, they accuse each other. Yes, you're here, says Oberon to Titania, because of your relationship with Theseus. Yes? And Titania says, oh yes, and what about you and Hippolyta? Right. So there we've got the connection now between the king and queen there and Theseus and Hippolyta, because Hippolyta was also a queen. Right? So already the strands are being connected. In the forest, they begin to interweave more and more into a more ever growingly complex web, I would say, right? But among the fairies, first of all, what is the impact of the quarrel between Titania and Oberon? They're not just rulers of a state in the way of Theseus is. They have a great impact on the world, on the cosmos, actually. And I want to just read that part. That's Act 2, Scene 1, line 81. 2, Scene 1. Sorry. Okay. They've just sort of, Oberon has accused Titania of having a relationship with Theseus, and she answers, "These are the forgeries of jealousy, and never since the middle summer spring met we on hill or in dale, forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or in the beached margent of the sea, to dance our ringlets to the whistling wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Therefore, what's been the result? of that Oberon's disturbing the dance of Titania and her fairies. Therefore, the winds, piping to us in vain, as in revenge, have sucked up from the sea contagious fogs, which, falling in the land, have every pelting river made so proud that they have overborne their continents. Now, they've been floods. What's been the result of the floods? The ox hath therefore stretched his yoke in vain, the ploughman lost his sweat, and the green corn hath rotted ere his youth attained a beard. The fold stands empty in the drowned field, and crows are fattened with the murren flock. The nine men's morris is filled up with mud, and the quaint mazes in the wanton green, for lack of tread, are undistinguishable. The human mortals lack their winter here. No night is now with him or carol blessed. Therefore, the moon, the governess of floods, pale in her anger, washes all the air, that through that rheumatic diseases do abound, and through this distemperature we see the seasons alter. Hoary-headed frosts fall in the fresh lap of the crimson rose, and on old Hyam's thin and icy crown, an odorous chaplet of sweet summer buds is as in mockery set. The spring, the summer, the childing autumn, angry winter, change their wonted liveries, and the mazed world by their increase now knows not which is which. And this same progeny of evils comes from our debate, from our dissension. We are their parents and original. So this total cosmic upheaval is caused by the quarrel within the supernatural world. Right? And you gather from that the enormous power of these fairies. They're not just fairies, right? They're more like gods, like pagan gods, controlling the seasons and hence controlling humankind. One thing impacts on the next. Right? But in addition to Titania and Oberon, we have another spirit, and that's Puck, who's completely different. We learn about him right at the beginning, the very, very first time we meet him. I hope you don't mind my quoting, because I think it does. I'm assuming the fairy is a he, she. I don't know why, because actually the four fairies who come in later, Peace Blossom, Cobweb Moth, and Mustard Seed, Bottom addresses them as Monsieur. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're male. It may mean that just the bottom gets it wrong. That's you never know in this play, right? Anyway, the fairy says, either I mistake your shape and making quite, or else you are that shrewd and knavish sprite called Robin Goodfellow. Are not you here that frights the maidens of the villagery, skim milk, and sometimes labour in their quern, and bootless make the breathless housewife churn, and sometime make the drink to bear no balm, mislead night wanderers, that's already a clue to what's going to happen.
What are you reading now?
I'm sorry, this is Act 2, Scene 1, line 56. I started at 56, the fairies. Mislead night wanderers, laughing at their harm, those that hobgoblin call you, and sweet Puck, you do their work, and they shall have good luck. Are not you he? And he replies, thou speakst aright. I am that merry wanderer of the night. I jest to Oberon and make him smile, when I a fat and bead-fed horse beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal. And sometimes lurk I in a gossip's bowl, in very likeness of a roasted crab apple. And when she drinks, against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale. The wisest aunt telling the saddest tale, sometimes for 3-foot stool mistaketh me. Then I slip from her bum, down topples she, and Taylor cries and falls into a cough. And then the whole choir hold their hips and laugh, and waxen in their mirth, and neeze and swear a merrier hour was never wanted there. This is a spiteful. Spitefulness is very important because it plays a very important role later on in the play. He likes to hurt. He likes to harm people. He gets a lot of pleasure out of this sadistic behavior. Right? So you have Oberon Titania on the one hand, and you have a very different kind of fairy, albeit a servant to Oberon, but someone who really likes to play tricks on human beings. Later on also, we are told about the two kinds of spirits who are abroad in the night. On the one hand, and I don't want to take too much quoting, but on the one hand, Puck talks about damned ghosts, right? Who haunt the night. And Oberon contends, no, but we are spirits of a different sort. Right? We are not ghosts. We are not damned. Right? And we, unlike the damned ghosts, and those of you who know Hamlet will know that the ghost has to disappear as the dawn rises. Right? The night is the time for ghosts. And Oberon says we don't have to disappear. We can still dance together with the rising light. So again, you've got the two associations with night. The evil spirits, but on the other hand, also potentially good. Right? Now, Oberon has powers of transformation. Right? Some are planned, and others are unplanned, spontaneous. And so, for example, he plans to get to, by force, actually by magic force, to get that Indian boy from Titania by applying to her eyes the juice, the essence of a plant called love in idleness, which leads whoever the person may be on whose eyes in their sleep this juice, potion is applied, to fall in love instantly with the first creature that they see. Right? Okay. And he sends Puck off to get that, right? And Puck says, yes, I'll make a girdle of the earth in 40 minutes, okay? And sure enough, he comes back slightly later. But meanwhile, Oberon has come across Lysander and Hermia, right? Who've fallen asleep in the forest, but at Hermia's insistence are not lying together, but apart from each other. Right? And Oberon mistakenly thinks that Lysander is spurning Hermia. Poor Hermia, right? Not being aware, of course, that it was Hermia herself who insisted on the separation. So he assumes that Lysander doesn't really like Hermia, right? That there's an enmity between them. And so, since he's going to have this potion anyway, he also applies it to Lysander's eyes. And the effect of the potion, as I said, is to make one fall in love instantly with whatever your eyes light upon. So in the first instance, it's Oberon. He may be a cosmic power, but he makes mistakes. Okay? You don't always get it right. Don't always get it right. I mean, he had a benevolent, there, if he wanted to be spiteful vis-a-vis Titania, in this case he was hoping to be benevolent. He was hoping that Lysander would fall in love with Hermia. Right? So we already have a case of mistakes, and then comes the additional mistake, is that Puck, having been told to put this potion on the eyes of a man wearing Athenian garb, puts it on the eyes of Demetrius. So that, yeah, he does. But before that happens, Lysander has woken up and has seen Helena, right, and has instantly fallen in love with her. Right? Okay. So quickly. There is Hermia still lying asleep, right? And there's a sense of spite, or it's of rejection, of real bitter, cruel rejection of Hermia in this case, right? Don't one side that, right? The important thing is that everybody makes mistakes. Oberon mistakes the relationship as dislike. Puck mistakes the man for another man, right? And you get the first knot, Sally, that now Lysander and Demetrius, just do an arrow in a different color. Lysander and Helena.
Now,
And, yes, over there, and also Demetrius to Helena, right? Top, okay? And now Hermia is the one who's left out. Right? Complete reversal of the situation that we had at the beginning of the play. So the confusions in this at this point really form like a knot. You see how the threads are beginning to be woven together at this stage. Right? Then comes the real point, which is that, well, we don't need a diagram for that, that's very simple. Titania falls asleep, lulled to sleep by a lullaby. Beautiful. Those of you who know Mendelssohn's superb music will remember this, right? Beautiful. And what does Titania see? Now, what does she see is a result of the artisans being in the forest that same night, right? Rehearsing this play of Pyramus and Thisbe. We'll come in a moment to the play and what they do with the play, or what they do with theatre, actually. And again, another of the paradoxes, what she sees, first of all, is the result of one of Puck's cruel tricks. And this is something we simply are not prepared for. To a certain extent, yes, we've seen, oh gosh, Puck making the mistake, Oberon making the mistake, everything going wrong with the lovers, right? But the one thing we haven't expected, and this is a real coup de théâtre, right, is the Bottom, who's gone off stage, it's during the rehearsal, he's not acting at the moment, returns with an ass's head. Nobody in the audience has expected that. Right? Okay. And the impact on us, it's uproarious, of course, particularly because Bottom doesn't know that he's got an ass's head, of course. Right? And so the others flee from him. Oh, Bottom, thou art translated. Right? And what do I see, says Quinn. He says, what do you see? You see an ass head of your own. Right? And the comedy that is evoked there again, it's spite, because we then learn that after they've seen him, the other artisans flee in terror, and then Puck again plays one of those tricks. He makes thorns catch on their clothes, right? They're bewildered, they're scared. Remember, it's dark. They don't know where they are. They haven't a clue, right? Okay. But he makes it even worse by performing, by natural things into supernatural things which impact on them, right? So there we have now the other strand being interwoven. Titania wakes up, right? Bottom, we'll come back to Bottom takes everything as it is, you know. Uloyo der chochmot, right? Okay, it's like, what do you see? You see an asset of your own. He's not, oh yes, they're trying to, this is to make an ass of me, he said, right? Okay. And so he sings nonchalantly, right? And it's to that singing that Titania awakens, right? Okay, Bottom with an ass's head now, right? Okay, and he's singing this little ditty. I will walk up and down here, and will sing that they shall hear. I am not afraid. And he sings this little song, okay? And Titania wakes up. What angel wakes me from my flowery bed? And he goes on singing. And look what he's singing. Right? The finch, the sparrow, and the lark, the plain song, cuckoo grey, whose note full many a man doth mark, and dares not answer nay. For indeed, who would set his wit to so foolish a bird? Who would give a bird the lie, though he cry cuckoo never so? I pray thee, gentle mortal, sing again. Mine ear is much enamoured of thy note, so is mine eye enthralled to thy shape, and thy fair virtue's force perforce doth move me on the first view to say, to swear I love thee. What's Bottom's response? Methinks, mistress, you should have little reason for that. And yet, to say the truth, reason and love keep little company together. More's the pity. Right? More's the pity that some honest neighbours will not make them friends. Nay, I can gleek upon occasion. Thou art as wise as thou art beautiful. Not so neither, but if I had wit enough to get out of the wood, I have enough to serve mine own turn. Out of this wood do not desire to go. Thou shalt remain here whether thou wilt or no. I am a spirit of no common rate. The summer still doth tend upon my state, and I do love thee. Therefore go with me. I'll give thee fairies to attend on thee, and they shall fetch thee jewels from the deep, and sing while thou on pressed flowers dost sleep. And I will purge thy mortal grossness so, that thou shalt like an airy spirit go. Again, by the way, notice it's rhymed verse, it's couplets, right? But the total misconception, misapprehension, right? And she calls in the four fairies, pleased on the cobweb, moth, and mustard seed, and orders them, be kind and courteous to this gentleman, hop in his walks and gambol in his eyes, feed him with apricots and dewberries, with purple grapes, green figs and mulberries. The honey bags steal from the humble bees, and for night tapers crop their waxen thighs, and light them at the fiery glowworm's eyes, to have my love to bed and to arise, and pluck the wings from painted butterflies, to fan the moonbeams from his sleeping eyes. Nod to him, elves, and do him courtesies. And so they turn, greet him, and this is Bottom's response, right? I cry your worship's mercy heartily. I beseech your worship's name. He's not, I mean, you know, he's just, oh yes, okay, this is just, no questioning. this enchantment, these promises from this ethereal fairy, right? Cobweb says, okay, Cobweb, I shall desire you of more acquaintance, good Master Cobweb. If I cut my fingers, I shall make bold with you. Your name, honest gentleman? Peas Blossom. I pray you command me to Mistress Squash, your mother, and to Master Peascod, your father. Good Master Peas Blossom, I should desire you of more acquaintance too. Your name, I beseech you, sir? Mustard Seed. Good Master Mustard Seed, I know your patience well. That same cowardly giant-like ox beef has devoured many a gentleman of your house. I promise you your kindred have made my eyes water ere now. I desire you of more acquaintance, good Master Mustard Seed. And I mean, he takes those names, he thinks in terms of what he knows of those things, right? The mustard making his eyes water and so on. Right? Total lack of imagination. A totally prosaic person who interprets words of what they mean. And it's that utter lack of astonishment on Bottom's part, right? As well as the unawareness, you've got a very complex comic situation here, right? And a very comic situation. You've got Titania falling in love with this extraordinary creature who again is an embodiment of a paradox, right? An ass's head, a human body, something unnatural, right? Something horrendous, like a mythological figure, right? And the contrast between Titania, whom, if you look at the imagery, first of all, what kind of life do these fairies live, right? The lightness, and then look at the names of the 4 fairies. They're all ethereal things. What's a cobweb? How tiny is a mustard seed? A little moth fluttering, right? Okay. One way in which Shakespeare helps us to see these creatures, I'm assuming that the fairies were played by boys, the 4 attendant fairies, although the grown-up fairies, were the adult fairies, Titania and Oberon, would have been played by normal actors. Though again, remember, in Shakespeare's theatre, all the actors were actors, there were no women actors. So even in Titania, but that's a make-believe which Shakespeare's audience accepted, right? One is female, one is already, and we, just by going to the theatre, you enter into that particular fantasy that you're going to be seeing men acting the role of women. So I want to, we'll come back again if we have time, if I have time, to the whole issue of music in the song, because the fairies sing a great deal. I think that may have been one of the things that attracted that really attracted Nelson to the story. Now, how are these? We've now got the 5 strands. We've got Pyramus and Thisbe, right, which they've been rehearsing, okay, which, as I said before, really is the most peculiar choice for a wedding. Now, how are these strands all woven together? Well, by Act 2, Scene 1, everybody's in the forest, right? Everybody's in the forest at night time, okay? So place and time weave them together. But there is another way in which they're woven together, and that is by a series of what I've referred to as paradoxes, right? Or oxymorons. 2 factors, right? 2 concepts, right? Which are actually mutually incompatible, or extremes, totally different extremes, right? We've got Athens, vis-a-vis the forest, the place of law and order and authority, vis-a-vis the place of tohu vavohu, utter confusion, right? You've got patriarchy and royal authority in one place. You've got rebellion and anarchy on the part of the lovers, right? You've got light, day, vis-a-vis darkness, night. You've got mortals, you've got fairies. We have love and friendship on one side. We have rivalry and hate on the other. Male, female, this is in no particular order, right? Aristocracy and plebeians. Right? Marriage and fidelity on one hand. Celibacy and barrenness on the other. Waking and dream, reality and illusion. And you have tragedy, or at least potential tragedy, in Hermia's having to decide between a life in a convent and marrying a man she does not love. Okay? A loveless marriage or a non-marriage of any kind. The night, I said at the beginning, right, with the Freudian association, but even Shakespeare already gets the point, right? The erotic madness, which is liberated by night, is contrasted with the censorship of day. Right? Those are the two main opposites, the two main binaries, right, which are brought together here. And that here we now have the entire weave of all strands together. All of these contradictions are brought together to create what? An artistic whole, the play itself, Midsummer Night's Dream, right? There's your carpet, there's your tapestry of all the threads brought together, right? In fact, the basic rhetorical device, the central trope in Midsummer Night's Dream, the key in terms, if we think of a piece of music, what is the key in which it is written is the oxymoron, right? The forcible bringing together of contradictory, incongruous opposites in order to create a new entity. And that new entity then is the play. I want you to notice I mentioned before, the way in which the moon appears in this play. Right? The moon is moon and moonlight are constantly mentioned. We had it right at the beginning, right? When Theseus mentioned it in terms of what the nuns do, right? That there's the moon is at one and the same time, right? Diana, the goddess of virginity. At one point she's referred to as Venus, who is the goddess of love. And in folklore she is also Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. Right? Three very different things. Certainly celibacy and love, romantic love or marriage, right? And witchcraft, all three together. But she remains one moon. It's always the same moon. It waxes and it wanes. But then it comes around again. It waxes and it wanes. Right? Spenser has a beautiful term in The Faerie Queene. Etern immutability. It is eternally mutable. It's constantly. The moon doesn't stay the same for 2 consecutive nights, but it's always the moon. Okay? And that image, that central image of something that's constantly changing, right, and yet remains the same, right? applies not only within the play, right? But it applies to drama altogether. That's the image which Shakespeare actually uses, right, if we think of it, right, which becomes totally dominant in the course of the play. The play is about transformation. Right? I quoted before that line of Quince's, "O bottom, thou art translated," which is transformed, right? Human body, an ass's head. And by the way, why an ass's head? Right? Why not a cow? Why not a horse? Because the ass, first of all, you see, he answers Quince, you see an ass head of your own. It's associated with folly, stupid fellow. But the ass also was a symbol of male potency, right? Which makes that coupling of Titania and Bottom even more horrific, I would say. It's rather like in Greek mythology, the way in which Zeus transforms himself into beasts, right, in order to have intercourse with a human being, right? Whether it's a bull, whether it's an eagle, right? So there is this sense of nightmare, of horror, right, as well as comedy. Within the comedy, there's that as well. Right? Again, the nightmare quality of what happens in the course of the night. Right? So the central action of the play then comprises these strands woven together. And it also, if we look at the time scheme and think again of the moon, the changing moon, right? It starts at daytime on one day, it goes to the forest at night the next day, and then it's the morning, still in the forest, right? And then it's night at the court, and that's the night of the wedding, right? Where all three couples are going to be united, a happy ending. But meanwhile, you not only move from time to time, from place to place, day to night, love to hate, sanity to irrationality, and security, which is daylight, authority, the court, right, to fear, right, to total dislocation in the forest. So that sense of dislocation, of bewilderment, of madness is a nightmare. It's not a dream. The play might just as well have been called A Midsummer Night's Nightmare. Right? When you think of what happens in the forest at night, it's not exactly a sweet dream. It leads to a questioning of reality. What is real? What is not real? When Lysander first rejects Hermia, she says, "Am I not Hermia? Are not you Lysander?" She remains the same. You may note, by the way, that the women don't change. Only the men. The women say always in Shakespeare, he was a great feminist Shakespeare. Well, I mean, leave Lady Macbeth alone. But in his comedies, right, in every one of the comedies, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, right here, Midsummer Night's Dream, All's Well That Ends Well, which is semi-comedy, right, the women remain constant. Right? It's the men who are fickle. Right? It's the men to whose eyes the potion is applied, not to the women. Right? Now, the interesting thing with the women, though, is that their friendship, their close friendship, and if we have time for that, I want to look at that marvelous speech of Helena's describing how the two of them, like two cherries on one stalk, used to sit together embroidering one and the same piece of embroidery. And now, because of rivalry in love on the part of the men, This has really torn them as their friendship asunder. And just to come back to that's action of the play, because you don't get it, of course, if you're reading. You have to use a lot of imagination, come to that in a minute, when you're reading the play to know what's going on. But when Oberon tries to solve the whole problem, and does eventually, and bids Puck, first of all, there's going to be total blackness, right? And then Puck is to lead the men who and fro. They want to fight. They're looking for each other to fight. At the same time, Helena's running away from Hermia. Hermia tries to scratch out Helena's eyes because of, and the way in which the truth comes out. Right? What was behind that friendship? What was the rivalry? Right? All of a sudden, right, Helena starts talking about Hermia being small, being little. Yeah? She's little, but she's a vixen. Right? And Hermia wants, as I say, wants to scratch out Helena's eyes. That the confusions which lead to total changes of emotions, of relationships, right? Which are then ultimately, let's say, sorted out. Right? All the mortals think, including Bottom, think that they have dreamt. Right? They all believe it's what we have seen happening, they all think has been a dream, including Bottom. The one who is not awakened, or who is awakened and has her sanity restored, but is forced to confront what happened to her, is Titania. When Titania awakens, and by the way, in the meantime, what we haven't seen on stage is what Oberon tells us, right, tells Puck, that while she was so infatuated with Bottom, he met her, and she willingly surrendered the Indian boy. No more quarrel. No, she's now infatuated with something else. But he no longer has any reason to keep her in that state of madness, right? But he shows her, there lies thy love. He makes her face up to the reality of the bestiality. It's as it were a final turn of the screw, I think, before they really make peace, again, joined in amiable parity. So there isn't a total awakening, or where they be. Not everybody thinks they've been dreaming. Titania doesn't. So in fact, there is only one character in the play who really dreams, and that is Hermia. And that is at Act 2, Scene 2, where at the beginning of the play, when she first wakes up, and meanwhile Lysander has run off, while she is still sleeping, while Hermia is still sleeping, he has gone chasing after Helena. And this is Act 2, Scene 2. Yeah, there we go. She wakes up. Now, when she, by the way, let me just look at Lysander's speech, because the change is so extreme after he's had this potion applied to him, right? Hermia, sleep thou there, and never mayst thou come Lysander near. For as a surfeit of the sweetest things the deepest loathing to the stomach brings, or as the heresies that men do leave are hated most of those they did deceive, so thou, my surfeit and my heresy, of all be hated, but the most of me. And not just that he's fallen out of love, turns into hatred. Right? And all my powers address your love and might to honor Helena and be her knight. He goes off, and she wakes up, and this is what she says. Help me, Lysander, help me. Do thy best to pluck this crawling serpent from my breast. Ay me, for pity, what a dream was here. Lysander, look how I do quake with fear. Methought a serpent eat my heart away, and you sat smiling at his cruel prey. Lysander, what, removed? Lysander, Lord, what, out of hearing, gone, no sound, no word? Alack, where are you? Speak, and if you hear, speak of all loves. I swoon almost with fear. No, then I well perceive you are not nigh. Either death or you I'll find immediately. Brilliant. That's one of the most artificial forms of verse, the right couplet. Yet notice how that sense of hysterics comes through. And what about the dream? Totally Freudian, no? Right. A serpent eating away at her heart. Well, Shakespeare did not know Freud. Freud may have known Shakespeare. He did. He wrote about Hamlet. But the way in which that image catches, the way in which the fear of dreams, the fear that we experience in dreams, can eat away at your heart. Right? The panic you feel when you wake up out of a dream like that. Even though, and you face reality, we know that she has good reason to feel this way because we've seen Lysander wake up. But that, as I say, is the only occasion in the play in which somebody actually dreams. Right? Now, the lovers' stories, right, evoke contradictory responses. Right? Everybody thinks they've dreamt. We know, we, the audience, know, quotes, right? They have not dreamt. We have seen these things. We've seen these transformations. And they really happened within the essential unreality of a play. Right? The lovers' contradictory responses, right, on the one hand, the lover's story evokes contradictory responses with Theseus and Hippolyte. And this is probably the most important part of the play, I would say, or the most appropriate episode. And it's Act 5, Scene 1, line 11. Right at the beginning of Act 5, Scene 1, we're back at the court, right? And Hippolyte says, "'Tis strange, my Theseus, that these lovers speak of." What's his response? "More strange than true. I never may believe these antique fables nor these fairy toys. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends." Now look what he brackets together. First of all, he's talked about lovers and madmen. But now he goes a step further. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Helen's beauty in the brow of Egypt. Right? Okay? That's the lover's madness. Now what about the poet? The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the form of things unknown, The poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Such tricks hath strong imagination, that if it would but apprehend some joy, it comprehends some bringer of that joy, or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed to bear. And his dismissal, those three, the lunatic, the lover, and the poet. What does Hippolyte reply? Right? But all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transformed so together, more witnesseth than fancy's images, and grows to something of great consistency. Right? But howsoever strange and admirable. All the story of the night told over by the poet in this case, right? When you tell the story, it becomes something real. And it's that issue of the reality and the fantasy, if you like, of the theatre, which I think is ultimately the main point of the play. Right? The telling, the putting it into an artistic form, right, makes it real. And that is, of course, what Shakespeare does. Right? In Midsummer Night's Dream, he takes as his raw material something wholly fantastic, something unrealistic, and he turns it into an artistic reality, which is theatre. He makes us believe through his art, right, that what we are seeing is real. He relies on what Coleridge called the willing suspension of disbelief into which we enter when we go into a theatre. We make a contract with the actors and with the author, right? For the time that we're sitting here, we'll assume that that's real. Same when we go to the cinema. If you really enter into that contract, that's what the artist, the real artist, demands of you. Right? His telling over of the story makes it real. And this is where the fifth strand comes in, Pyramus and Thisbe. Right? Because what the artisans don't get is the whole issue of theatrical illusion. Right? It's going to be moonlight. Pyramus and Thisbe mean at moonlight. Moonlight? How are we going to effect moonlight? Well, we have somebody coming in who will say, I am the moon man in the moon, right? And he comes in with his lantern and his dog, which is the way in which the man in the moon, again, the moon, right, is portrayed in folklore, right? Or the wall. These lovers have a wall that separates them. Oh, well, then we have to have a wall. So another actor comes in, right, with lines all over himself, right? I am the wall, he says. Right? Now, on the one hand, in their rehearsal, when they're talking about the lion, and who is it, Smug, one of Smug plays the lion, I can't remember which one, right? But he says, but the ladies will be frightened. You can't bring a lion among ladies, right? That's going to be the death of us. No. So you will wear a lion's mask, but you will lift up, and he does this in the play within the play, lift up the mask and say, don't be frightened, ladies. I'm not really a lion. I'm really Snug the tailor. Okay. So on the one hand, they think that the audience doesn't have enough imagination, and you have to bring a wall and a moon, because they have to see the moon to know that Pyramus and Thisbe are meeting it. And on the other hand, you think they have too much imagination, that they'll think that this lion is a real lion. the lack of that understanding of a contract between audience and actor, of course, is precisely the point of Pyramus and Thisbe, right? But it's also making another point, because it makes us look at what these artisans do. They've taken a tragedy and they've turned it into a comedy by the way in which they perform it, right? They draw it, and the function of the play within the play is really to draw a contrast, a distinction between their play within the play and Shakespeare's own magic. So if we can I just want to quickly, not only by this issue of imagination and not trusting the audience's imagination, but also if you look at the style of this play that they're performing, Pyramus and Thisbe, right? Sweet moon, I thank thee for thy sunny beams. I thank thee, moon, for shining now so bright. For by thy gracious golden glittering gleams I trust to take of truest Thisbe sight. But stay, O sight, but mark, poor knight, what dreadful dole is here. Eyes, do you see? How can it be? O dainty duck, O dear, thy mantle good, what, stained with blood? Approach, ye furies fell. O fates, come, come, cut thread and thrum, quail, crush, conclude, and quell. Now, you might not believe it, but that's the style in which some of Shakespeare's precursors actually wrote. If you look at some of the plays that were written before the great Elizabethan age of Marlowe and Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, it was like that. It was just doggerel, really, to a very large extent. So Shakespeare, right, is contrasting. Look at the way I conjured up night and moon. Okay. And look at the way they're doing it. Look at the poetry that I created and what our forerunners, some of my contemporaries, early contemporaries, did. In other words, what we've got here is totally self-reflexive play. Shakespeare is making you ultimately look at the play itself and consider what is theatre. Right? Yes, theatre is an illusion in a way. Right? It demands of us, the audience, to enter into that contract. But I will do it in such a way, right, by the telling over of the story through my art, right? I will transform this utter fantasy of fairies, of a fairy turning a human being into a half beast, right? Of fairies creating a cosmic upheaval. I will make it all real to you through my poetry, through my art. And that, I think, is the ultimate point of Midsummer Night's Dream. To make us, the audience, fall into the fantasy, accept the fantasy, and in this respect, the very, very last quote, while they're watching the play, right, Theseus makes comments, Act 5, Scene 1, it's page 106, there was this line, it's while they're watching the play, it doesn't matter, it's not a long quote, right? Hippolytus says of the play that they're performing, this is the silliest stuff that ever I heard. And Theseus still, he's still very contemptuous of theatre and of art and poetry. The best in this kind, and he's talking about actors now, the best in this kind are but shadows. Now, shadows was another word that people did use for actors. Because an actor, what is an actor? He's not himself, he's not real. Right? He's a spirit, he's a ghost, he's another character. Right? The best in this kind are but shadows, and the worst are no worse if imagination amend them. What does Hippolytus say? It must be your imagination then, and not theirs. There's the contract, right? We, the audience, have to accept temporarily that this is real. And all the while we know it isn't real. Right? We know it's theatre. But for a while we just forget. If the play is really great, right, you are made to feel that that it's true to life, that the emotions, the feelings, right, even of fairies are true to life. The jealousies, the envies, the falling in and out of love, the creating of friendships, the breaking of friendships. The whole issue of transformation is central. And then comes, the final brilliant touch of Puck's epilogue. After everything's finished, and notice that it finishes with the fairies, the play ends with the fairies, and Oberon and Titania and their attendants coming to bless the ducal home. In other words, the forest and the fairies have now entered into Athens and the court. It's night again, right? And the two have blended. These two opposites, which all the time were kept apart, and now suddenly there is a fusion. But is there? And Puck comes forward and makes the following little epilogue speech. If we shadows, remember the shadows from before, if we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme, no more yielding but a dream, gentles, do not reprehend. If you pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest Puck, if we have unearned luck now to scape the serpent's tongue, the hissing, right, we will make amends ere long, else the Puck a liar call. So, good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall store amends. Who's talking? Puck, the actor. If we shadows have offended. Puck is both a spirit in the play, but he's also an actor. And he's saying to the audience, well, if you didn't like this, we'll make amends. And give us your hands. Ultimate, that final epilogue, wow. It's Shakespeare playing with the audience, right? Wittily. Have you dreamt? Have we dreamt? Was it real? Was it real? Right? And I think, as always, with Shakespeare, well, with any great play, as I said before, it's the suspension of disbelief. We have to act. We have to accept that drama is not reality and it is reality. The great drama brings us into touch, just like tragedy, right, with human emotions, with human feelings, with humans' often nonsensical behavior. Right? And I think that, Shakespeare's ability to do this is just overwhelming. If I think back to King Lear and the impact of Lear particularly, which I really I think is his greatest tragedy. I think I mentioned it, but you weren't all at my lecture, but I remember coming out of a very, very fine production of Lear at Stratford, actually. No one in the audience could look anyone else in the eye. We all walked out with our eyes downcast. So powerful has that feeling been. The overwhelming impact of it. The impact of comedy is quite different, of course. But again, I think we are temporarily transformed. We, the audience. And this is where, when Hippolytus says, it must be your imagination that mends it. And finally, come back to that final point. When we enter a theatre, we enter a contract with whatever's going on the stage, with the dramatists, with the actors, everything. And if you consider, and here again, Shakespeare was working with a virtually empty stage, right? There was very little scenery. I mean, sometimes they put a tree on the stage and so on. He was working in daylight. There was no artificial light in his theatre. His performances took place in daylight. Look how he evoked night. Look how he evoked moonlight, right? Through poetry. But we have to say, not like Theseus, the best of this kind is but shadows, right? No, we have to say, okay, I bought my ticket. By buying my ticket, I'm accepting the challenge. Yeah. I'll sign my side of the contract if you fulfill yours as well as Shakespeare did, and not in the way that the artisans did. Okay, that's it. Thank you.